Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me today. It's a privilege to be here because what we are about to explore is not just a list of expensive coins, but a study in value, history, and economic reality. Much like investing in markets, investing in rare coins requires more than just passion. It requires principles. When I think about the top coins of all time, I do not merely think of their auction prices. I think of what caused them to become rare, the economic cycles, the geopolitical shifts, the craft of minting, and the very human stories embedded in metal. These are not just artifacts, they are living witnesses to history, and they represent an interplay of supply, demand, and risk. Over the course of this speech, I will walk you through 20 rare and expensive coins. But more importantly, I will show you how to think about them, not emotionally, but with a principled framework. Because if you want to invest in things that endure, you must understand the underlying cause and effect forces, not just the surface level glamour. When you look at the greatest coins ever produced, those rare, expensive masterpieces that have survived centuries, the first thing you must do is step back and avoid getting caught up in the emotion of their price tags. Instead, you have to look at them through a principled, almost systematic lens. That's how you uncover real value. Whenever I analyze anything, whether it's a financial asset, a geopolitical shift, or in this case, a rare coin, I start by asking a simple question. What are the timeless principles that govern why this thing became valuable in the first place? Because if you understand the principles, you'll understand the asset. And if you understand the asset, you're no longer guessing, you're reasoning. When I talk about a principled framework for evaluating rare coins, I mean stripping away speculation and approaching each coin as a reflection of deeper forces, scarcity, historical context, craftsmanship, supply shocks, economic collapse, human behavior, and long-term desirability. These principles don't change. They were true 200 years ago, and they will be true 200 years from now. So when you look at a coin that sold for millions, don't start by asking, why did someone pay so much? Start by asking, what underlying forces made it valuable? Because price is just an outcome. Principles explain the outcome. The first principle is scarcity, but not the surface level scarcity. People casually mention real scarcity is engineered by events. Wars that melted entire mintages, political transitions that halted production, governments that recalled currency, or economic collapses that forced people to surrender their wealth. A coin can only be rare if something in history made it rare. And when you trace that cause and effect chain, your understanding becomes much deeper than only 10 exist. You begin to see why only 10 exist. That difference is everything. The second principle is significance. A coin's value grows when it captures something meaningful about a moment in time, an empire changing, a king rising or falling, a mint opening or closing, a breakthrough in metallurgy or design. People pay for meaning far more than they pay for metal. A coin that represents a pivotal turning point is like an asset backed by historical memory, and that memory compounds over generations because future collectors will want the same things past collectors wanted. Importance, identity, connection, story. The third principle is quality, but once again, not in the shallow sense. Quality isn't only the grade stamped on a slab. Quality is the survival of beauty despite time, circulation, and destruction. When a coin survives with exceptional detail, it becomes a statistical anomaly. And anomalies create value. It's the same principle seen in markets. When something exists in limited form and in the best condition, demand naturally concentrates around it. People gravitate toward uniqueness, and quality amplifies uniqueness. The fourth principle is human psychology. People want what other people want, and this creates cycles of demand. A coin that captures imaginations will continue to do so because humans are driven by stories, symbolism, prestige, and identity. Understanding this psychological pattern lets you foresee long-term demand. If a coin has captivated generations before you, it will likely captivate generations after you. This gives you a probabilistic edge because value backed by human behavior tends to persist. The fifth principle is time. Time is the great filter. Many coins were once common. Only a few survived the erosion of centuries. Time eliminates the ordinary and highlights the exceptional. When something lasts, its significance grows, not because the object changes, but because the world around it does. A coin that has endured political collapse, wars, dynasties, migrations, and societal transformation becomes more than metal. It becomes evidence, and evidence becomes valuable. When you combine these principles, scarcity, significance, quality, psychology, and time, you begin to see why certain coins rise to the top. You're no longer impressed by the price, you're impressed by the forces that created that price. And that's the point. The price is just noise. The principles are the signal. If you want to evaluate coins the way you evaluate great investments, focus on the underlying drivers, not the market hype. The rarest coins in history became valuable because they aligned with timeless forces that are still at play today. When you anchor yourself in those principles, you gain clarity. And clarity is the advantage that separates thoughtful collectors from emotional buyers. When you look at the rarest and most expensive coins in history, you can't simply admire them as isolated artifacts. To understand their true value, you must look through the lens of cause and effect, because nothing becomes valuable without a sequence of forces pushing it in that direction. Everything that exists today is the product of a chain of decisions, accidents, policies, human behaviors, and historical circumstances. Coins are no different. Their rarity, their desirability, their astronomical prices, none of it is random. It all comes from a set of causes that shape the outcome over time. Most people see a legendary coin and stop at the surface. They see the metal, the shine, the grade, the last auction number. They see the result, but not the process. And when you don't understand the process, you're operating blindly. But when you can look at anything and trace backwards, asking what caused this to happen, you gain clarity. You begin to understand the coin the same way you would understand an economic cycle, a market crash, or a financial bubble. Everything has drivers, and if you understand the drivers, you can anticipate outcomes instead of reacting to them. Take any iconic coin, the kind that sells for millions, and ask yourself what created its value. You'll see a pattern. A coin might be rare today because a government melted almost the entire mintage. That didn't happen randomly. It happened because of a war, a political transition, a financial crisis, or a shift in monetary policy. And those events didn't happen randomly either. They were the effects of deeper forces, leaders making decisions, economies collapsing, populations rebelling, regimes tightening control. When you trace these chains, you realize that the rarity of a coin is not an accident. It is the inevitable outcome of a predictable sequence of events. Think about why demand grows for certain coins. It's not only because collectors suddenly decide to desire them, it's because of cultural cycles, generational cycles, wealth cycles, and even technological cycles. When grading standards improved, coins with exceptional condition shot up in demand. When global wealth expanded, more people entered the collectibles market. When information became more accessible, people learned the stories behind coins, and stories create emotional connection. That emotional connection increases demand, and demand increases price. Again, cause leading to effect. The same principle applies to survival. A coin that exists today in pristine condition is the survivor of thousands of micro events. Who originally received it, how they handled it, whether it's stored or spent, whether it avoided meltings, wars, natural disasters, and countless moments where it could have been lost forever. Survival is not luck. It's a long series of cause and effect decisions, most of them made unconsciously by people who had no idea they were preserving a future treasure. When you look deeper, you start to see that markets for rare coins behave exactly like any other market. They follow patterns. They respond to supply shocks, economic downturns, speculative booms, generational interest, and liquidity cycles. People think collectibles are unpredictable, but they're only unpredictable if you don't understand the forces shaping them. If you can analyze coins the way you analyze economies, studying the drivers instead of the data, you gain insight that others miss. To cause and effect thinking also protects you from illusions. Many people chase coins because of hype, not substance. They see rising prices and assume they'll continue rising. But if you're trained to ask what is actually driving this trend, you see through the excitement. If a coin's demand is rising because of genuine historical significance, limited supply, and stable long-term interest, that's a durable force. If its demand is rising because of temporary speculation or social media noise, that force will weaken. Cause predicts effect. Likewise, when you encounter a coin with extraordinary value, don't assume it's the metal or the design alone. Ask yourself what historical chain created that value. Did the coin represent a shift in dynasty? Was it minted during an economic transformation? Was it tied to a moment that changed a nation? Was its mintage cut short because of political upheaval? Every answer adds a layer of understanding, and understanding creates sound judgment. The ability to think in cause and effect terms is what separates a thoughtful evaluator from a blind admirer. When you can trace the path from origin to present value, the coin becomes more than an object. It becomes a map of historical forces. And once you train yourself to think this way, you don't just understand rare coins more deeply, you understand everything more deeply. Because value, real value, is always the effect of something meaningful that came before it. And if you can read that sequence clearly, you can see what others cannot. When people talk about rare and expensive coins, they often focus on the glamour, the big auction numbers, the headlines, the mystique of owning something so few people will ever touch. But if you want to understand them with real clarity, you must approach them the same way you would approach building a strong, resilient portfolio, by acknowledging risk, managing exposure, and diversifying intelligently. It doesn't matter whether you're dealing with markets, historical artifacts, or collectibles. The underlying principles are identical. Anything with value carries risk. Anything rare carries concentrated risk, and anything emotional carries even more risk because emotions distort judgment. That's why diversification isn't just a suggestion, it's a necessity. A lot of people make the mistake of putting too much of their capital into a single rare coin because they've fallen in love with the story behind it. They convince themselves that a coin with legendary history or a record-breaking price tag is automatically a safe bet. But emotional conviction is not the same as rational confidence. When you anchor your decisions on feelings, you're setting yourself up for fragility. The world doesn't care how much you love an asset. It will still fluctuate. It will still surprise you. It will still expose you if you haven't prepared for the downside. And with rare coins, the downside isn't theoretical. It's real, and it's often invisible until it hits you. The truth is, every rare coin carries specific risks tied to its nature. There are authentication risks, even with certified pieces. There are provenance risks. If the history isn't fully documented, there are liquidity risks, because the pool of buyers for ultra-rare assets is always small, no matter how desirable the coin may be. There are market cycle risks, periods when collectibles soften because larger economic conditions shift and wealthy buyers pull back. And there are historical risks where new discoveries can devalue what was once considered extremely rare. These risks aren't signs that something is wrong. They're simply part of reality. And the only way you can navigate reality intelligently is by diversifying across it. Diversification in coins works the same way it works in markets. You spread your exposure across different categories, so no single weakness can harm you. That means different eras, different metals, different countries, different historical themes, and different levels of rarity. When you diversify thoughtfully, you're not just protecting yourself from loss, you're positioning yourself to capture upside from many directions instead of relying on one. You create balance, and balance is what keeps you stable when the world moves unexpectedly. Some people misunderstand diversification. They think it means diluting their best ideas. But real diversification isn't about weakening your position. It's about strengthening your resilience. It's the difference between standing on one leg and standing on several. Even if you believe strongly in a specific coin, a specific era, or a specific narrative, that belief shouldn't blind you to the reality that anything can shift. When you build a broad, well-structured collection, you allow the strength of one area to offset the weakness in another. Over time, that stability compounds. And compounding stability is far more valuable than chasing a single spectacular win. Another element that diversification protects you from is illusion. The illusion that you understand something fully when you actually don't. No one, no matter how knowledgeable, can predict every variable. Markets shift for reasons no one saw coming. Sentiment changes. Governments release new archives that rewrite history. Technology improves and exposes forgeries that went undetected for decades. When you diversify, you account for what you don't know. You give yourself the flexibility to adjust when reality shows you something different from what you expected. If you study people who have built meaningful wealth, whether through financial markets, business ownership, or collectibles, they all share a common pattern. They reduce concentration risk and embrace balance. They don't bet their future on a single outcome. They prepare for a range of outcomes. They understand that resilience matters more than brilliance, and that sustainable success is built not on being right once, but on staying strong across time. Rare coins are no different. No matter how extraordinary a particular piece may seem, it should never become the entire foundation of your collection or your strategy. A great collection is built the same way a great portfolio is built, one thoughtful decision at a time, guided by principles, protected by balance, and designed to endure. When you diversify, not superficially, but intentionally, you transform the unpredictable into something manageable. You turn risk into something you can live with. And you turn your pursuit of rare coins into something that isn't just exciting, but sustainable. In the end, diversification isn't about reducing ambition. It's about increasing longevity. It's about building something that can withstand shocks, cycles, emotions, and surprises. And if you can do that, you will not only own great coins, you will own great decisions. When you're dealing with rare coins, especially the ones that are celebrated, expensive, and pushed forward as the crown jewels of the collecting world, you have to understand something fundamental. Mistakes are inevitable. It doesn't matter how intelligent, experienced, or cautious you think you are, you will misjudge a coin at some point. You'll buy something that turns out to be overpriced. You'll trust a seller who doesn't deserve that trust. You'll fall in love with a story instead of the facts. Or you'll overlook details that only become obvious when it's too late. People often treat mistakes like signs of incompetence or failure, but they're actually the most valuable part of the journey. In fact, they're the only way to develop real wisdom. Most individuals enter the world of rare coins with enthusiasm, but not with self-awareness. They assume they're different, that they won't make the same errors everyone else does. They believe that passion alone will keep them safe. But passion can be blinding. It makes you see only what you want to see. When you encounter a coin that looks extraordinary, you start rationalizing why it must be genuine, why its price is justified, or why it's the opportunity of a lifetime. You begin to build a narrative that supports your desire instead of questioning it. And that's where mistakes begin, not with ignorance, but with overconfidence. The truth is, the rare coin market is full of traps. Forgeries get more sophisticated every decade. Provenance documents can be incomplete or manipulated. Grading standards shift, and what was considered top tier 20 years ago may not be viewed the same today. Auction hype can inflate prices far beyond intrinsic or historical value. And sometimes something as simple as lighting, photography, or emotional excitement can distort your perception. But none of this is a problem if you have the right mindset, one that sees mistakes as a necessary stage in building expertise rather than something to avoid at all costs. Mistakes have a way of exposing your blind spots. They show you what assumptions you made, what information you ignored, and where your judgment drifted away from reality. Most people react to mistakes with denial. They blame circumstances, sellers, or bad luck. But denial guarantees the mistake will repeat itself in another form. If you want to grow, you have to confront the mistake directly, almost analytically. You have to ask yourself what your mind was doing at the moment of the decision. Were you rushing? Were you emotional? Were you trying to impress someone? Were you ignoring a small detail because the larger story felt too good to question? When you reflect honestly, you transform a painful moment into a powerful lesson. And these lessons compound. You become more perceptive. You begin to see warning signs earlier. You start identifying patterns that others miss, patterns in pricing trends, seller behavior, lighting techniques in photography, inconsistencies in historical records, or even how certain metals age. You develop an internal radar that becomes sharper with each mistake. Eventually, you become someone who can look at a coin and instantly recognize whether something feels off, not because you're gifted, but because you've trained your mind through reflection. Another benefit of learning from mistakes is humility. Humility isn't weakness. It's accuracy. It keeps you grounded. It keeps you open to information instead of clinging to assumptions. It allows you to ask questions others are too proud to ask. The rare coin market, like any market, rewards accuracy and punishes ego. When you cultivate humility, you stop trying to be right and start trying to understand, and understanding leads to better decisions. There's also something profoundly stabilizing about acknowledging your mistakes. It removes the emotional volatility that comes from pretending to be perfect. When you accept that errors are part of the process, you stop fearing them. And when you stop fearing them, you think more clearly. You take better notes, you ask deeper questions, and you evaluate coins without the anxiety that clouds judgment. You become less reactive and more strategic. People often believe that expertise is built on knowledge alone, but real expertise, especially in something as nuanced as rare coins, is built on corrected errors. Every seasoned collector, every historian, every numismatist carries a long history of mistakes behind their expertise. The difference is that they didn't run from those mistakes. They studied them, they learned from them, they allowed pain to reshape their thinking rather than distort it. If you're serious about understanding rare coins, you have to embrace the same approach. Don't chase perfection, chase progress. Don't hide from your errors. Examine them. Each mistake is a doorway into a deeper understanding. And if you reflect honestly, you'll find that the lessons you learned from your worst decisions are worth far more than the coins you lost money on. In the end, the real value you gained from rare coins isn't just the metal, the rarity, or the history. It's the evolution of your own judgment. And judgment improves through mistakes, reflection, and the willingness to face reality head on. That's how you grow. That's how you become wise. That's how you rise above emotion and begin to see things clearly. When you look at the world of rare and expensive coins, there's a natural temptation to focus only on the glory, the record-breaking sales, the legends behind each piece, the prestige of owning something almost no one else will ever touch. But if you truly want to understand these coins, not in a superficial way, but in a meaningful, accurate, and long-lasting way, you have to operate with a deep sense of honesty, not hype, not wishful thinking, not stories crafted to inflate value. You need clarity. And clarity only comes from being radically truthful with yourself about what a coin is, what it isn't, and what risks surround it. In any field where passion runs high, the truth gets distorted because people want certain things to be true. They want the coin to be rarer than it is. They want the provenance to be cleaner than it actually is. They want the grading to be flawless, even when it's not. This emotional pull toward a preferred reality is one of the biggest dangers in collecting. It blinds you. It makes you trust assumptions instead of evidence. It makes you overlook small flaws, questionable histories, or inflated descriptions because you're chasing the feeling of discovering something extraordinary. But if you allow yourself to drift away from truth, the consequences eventually catch up to you. Being honest in this space doesn't mean being cynical. It means being rigorous. It means looking at a coin and asking the questions many people avoid. Is the story accurate? Is the documentation complete? Is the rarity justified? Is the grading consistent with modern standards? Is the seller reputable? Are there comparable examples that contradict the asking price? When you insist on truthful answers, you strip away illusions. And when illusions disappear, you're left with reality. Reality is always the safest foundation to stand on. Truth also means acknowledging the uncomfortable parts of the rare coin world. There are forgeries so advanced that even experienced collectors have been fooled. There are coins that have changed hands through questionable channels. There are sellers who embellish stories and conceal histories. Markets occasionally inflate values far beyond what is sustainable. And there are situations where a coin's greatness is based more on narrative than on actual evidence. Pretending these things don't exist doesn't protect you, it exposes you. When you commit to honesty, you become harder to deceive, not only by others, but by yourself. You stop relying on opinions and start relying on facts. You stop buying stories and start buying substance. You start recognizing patterns and inconsistencies that others overlook because they're too emotionally invested to see clearly. Truth sharpens your judgment the same way pressure sharpens steel. You gain an edge, not through luck, but through awareness. There's another side to truthfulness, transparency. If you're serious about building a collection or studying rare coins over the long term, your decisions need to be transparent to yourself. That means writing down why you purchased a coin, what risks you identified, what information you verified, and what uncertainties you accepted. Most people skip this step because it forces them to confront gaps in their reasoning. But that rarity is exactly where growth comes from. When your thinking is visible to you, you can analyze it, refine it, and improve it. Transparency is not about showing others your process. It's about showing it to yourself so you can learn from it. Honesty also requires welcoming disagreement. When someone questions the authenticity, value, or condition of a coin you're excited about, Your instinct will be to defend your position. But defense doesn't lead to truth, openness does. If you're confident, you should be willing to explore opposing views. And if you're wrong, discovering it early will save you from much larger losses later. Disagreement, when approached correctly, becomes a powerful tool for refining your understanding. Ultimately, the reason truth matters so much in the world of rare coins is simple. The stakes are high. These are not commodities you can easily liquidate or replace. When you're dealing with pieces of history, each decision carries weight. If you make those decisions based on fantasy, exaggeration, or emotion, the cost can be enormous. But if you ground your decisions in truth, objective, sometimes uncomfortable, always clarifying truth, you build a collection that reflects substance, not illusion. Over time, the people who thrive in this world are the ones who discipline themselves to see things as they are, not as they wish them to be. They look past stories and look into evidence. They question everything, especially their own assumptions. They correct quickly when reality contradicts their beliefs. And because of that, they build collections and understanding in a field full of passion and hype. Truth becomes your compass. It keeps you steady, it keeps you logical, and it keeps you aligned with reality. And in the long run, reality always wins. So, to all of you watching, remember that investing in rare coins is not just about wealth, it's about wisdom. It's about understanding history, recognizing patterns of value, and embracing risk with clarity. If you approach this with principles, with truth, with humility, with a cause and effect mindset, you will not only build a valuable collection, but also cultivate a resilient understanding of value itself. In closing, I leave you with this: value is not in the flash of a coin's price, but in the substance of its story. Evaluate with rigor, act with prudence, reflect on your mistakes, and above all, always seek the truth. That is how you become not just a collector, but a thoughtful steward of history and value. Thank you for your attention. Let us embark on this journey through time, through metal, and through meaning together.